The BJP's Amit Malviya is suing independent digital platform The Wire. This after the platform had to take down and apologize for stories that were found to be false on tech giant Meta. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today is on the Meta media debate. The Wire claimed a couple of weeks ago to have a grand, big, giant expose on Meta, except that as it turned out, now, and we know this conclusively, the documentation in that report was fake. The Wire has now apologized to its readers and has promised to put better editorial protocols in place. But as the debate unfolded, the Wire's editorial team, in fact, argued with anybody who raised questions online. The BJP's Amit Malviya was named as a central political figure who had sweeping powers to take down posts. This has now been found to be false. He is talking about suing The Wire. The Wire's previous tech exposes, including about an app called Tech Fog, according to The Wire, have now also been taken down, putting a question mark over The Wire's internal editorial systems, but also throwing up questions for the media at large. As the BJP and The Wire collide, actually this is a debate for every journalist. In increasingly polarized times where India's media find itself often divided across the trenches of left and right, there are many who resist those labels. But in these polarized times, what does this entire debate mean for truth-telling? The Economist, for example, indicted The Wire for the stupidity in choosing partisanship over process. A lot to unpack, as I said here, beyond the collisions between the BJP and The Wire, question marks over, in a way, the assertions being made by independent media that we are somehow more evolved, somehow more enlightened than what goes by mainstream media. Let's introduce our panel on the program today. Pranesh Prakash is with us. Pranesh was among, I would say, the first to say that there was something wrong in the reporting by Wire. At the time, his critique was not taken seriously and was received with hostility. He was vindicated in the end, and of course he came to it purely as a technical expert, not through the prism of left and right. And we'll ask him to speak a little bit more about how he felt being treated with that kind of hostility. Sandip Ghose, a columnist, author, political commentator, no fan of The Wire in these times when the left and right fault lines seem to divide most people. Apart from those of us who resist that labeling, Sandip is an avowed supporter of the Prime Minister. Does that impact how he sees The Wire? We'll ask him that, because remember, The Wire is an avowed critic of the government. Kalpana Sharma is an author and columnist, one of our veteran journalists, praised The Wire in her comments, saying all of Indian media needs to learn from the example that The Wire has set. Is that really the case, or is The Wire in fact claiming victimhood for itself even in its apology? Sadanand Dhume, with the Wall Street Journal, trenchant columnist, tries to resist the labels of left and right. Where does he fall in this debate? We'll find out in a moment. And finally, Manisha Pande at the Newslaundry, who I think runs possibly the best media satire show across platforms. Will she satirize The Wire, or will it be spared because it is quote unquote new media and on the same side in that sense as Newslaundry? So a lot to talk about here. So in fact, Manisha, I will get to you in a moment, but I want to start with Pranesh, because Pranesh, in a sense, uncovered everything that felt wrong, the story failing the smell test. Now Wire having to take down another story on the Tech Fog app, which, by the way, actually had a mention of me as well. It claimed that I was among women journalists, the second most trolled woman journalist in India, and so on. So we all have, things to say about this. Pranesh, the dust hasn't yet settled. Wire's response after the BJP's Amit Malviya has decided to sue them is talking about a malintent to discredit them. Earlier, they spoke about being deceived by a member of their tech team. How do you see this? And could you please unmute yourself before you respond?
Sure. I think it's pretty clear that The Wire, that some journalists in The Wire did make claims that that were not factual at all, and that the Wire stood by those journalists at first, took a very hostile position towards the statements coming out from, say, Meta, but in the end they had to accede that in fact the as it were the facts were against them, that what they kept claiming was true was not true. And I don't personally see there being a strong ground for a defamation claim, which is what is being put forward, because at least not against the Wire, which has retracted the story, which has apologized, but not specifically to Mr. Malviya and not specifically to Meta, which I think is a little bit trollish of them. With their apology to their readers, they really should have also apologized to the principal figures involved in the story, and especially to Meta, who they multiple times claimed were lying. So
that's a really important point, that the apology, you believe, in that sense falls short, because it's basically making allegations against Meta, in this case the BJP's Amit Malviya, a story that turns out to be fake. You're saying the apology is incomplete without a direct apology to both of those protagonists.
Yes, but again, given that there has been a retraction of the Meta stories and a partial suspension of the TechFox story, I'm not really clear there's much of a strong legal ground for either a criminal or a civil defamation suit right now.
Okay, let's get to the legality of it later. Before I open this up, Pranesh, briefly, when you were pointing out, and to me, in a way, this is actually the larger problem with the story. Anyone can get a story wrong. We've all got stories wrong. We've all made mistakes. I think when the questions were being raised by experts such as yourself, by the Facebook whistleblower Sophie Zhang, she told me she was called a Sangi for raising those questions. She was basically called a fascist enabler for raising those questions, which really speaks to how partisanship is shaping the responses of journalists today. How were your interventions received before the Wire finally admitted that you were right?
It's pretty clear that many of these labels were attached to me as well, but it's just water off a duck's back. I don't think anyone who's been online for any substantial amount of time could or should rather take any such comments personally, and so it's not those comments that hurt, but rather that so many very senior journalists were so credulous, were viewing this not from a perspective of whether the facts lines up with what what the Wire or what Meta claimed, but rather viewed this from a hyper partisan lens, and and I would also add with confirmation bias, because already Meta is seen as the big bad guy out there, involved in manipulating elections, involved in supplicating wishes, and so on. So it was primarily those pre-established quote-unquote facts which led journalists to take the positions they did. And it's clear from the commentary that they were putting out on Twitter that that's how they viewed it. And that was quite dispiriting, I must say.
So let me bring in Manisha here. Manisha, as I said, you run an extremely successful show that takes down TV channels and their content, and there's a lot to be ashamed of on those channels every week. But would you turn your satirical lens on the Wire, or would in some ways a kind of, I don't want to use the word partisanship because that would be imputing motive to the content that you pick up, but there has been this suggestion online that new media, independent media, digital platforms would never be scathing about the Wire. You'd never meme them in the way that you'd meme an Arnab Goswami or a Rahul Shiv Shankar, and that has less to do with journalistic objectivity and more to do with your own partisanship. How do you respond to that? Would you meme them? Would they be the subject of your weekly satire show?
One thing is that the scope of my work at Newslaundry is not limited to TV.
Of course.
That is the most it's the most popular thing that I do, but I am the executive editor there. And towards that end, we have put out 3 very detailed stories on Wire. In fact, we broke the story on the fact that these 2 experts that they supposedly, vetted their story through completely denied that. So we had them on record for the first time saying that we never participated in any verification. We've discussed this, on our podcast and stuff like that. Nuisance's scope is television news, so I do tend to focus on what's happening on TV. And I think that because now over the last 3 days we've seen this made it to television news, I'm going to be touching it in my next episode. But again, I also want to just 3 things I just want to say. That one, I think Pranesh is very right when it comes to the apology that has come so far. We have had examples of such cases abroad. The famous Rolling Stone campus rape story, Rukmini Kalimachi episode with the Caliphate. I think what The Wire has to do next has to put out a very clear apology, put out a very clear explanation on what went wrong, and of course, put out an apology to Amit Malviya and Meta, because you're implicating 2 people in a story, which now it turns out was based on fabricated documents. So that is really incumbent on The Wire. And because you picked up television news, and there is this debate of, you talk about Arnab and you talk about Times Now, why don't you want to talk about Wire? To me, first and foremost, I just cannot equate what happens on a section of television media with anything else that happens in the media world, whether it's newspapers or whether it's, independent online alternate media. Because day in and day out on Times Now, on channels like Republic, you see a kind of spectacle which is unseen anywhere. From Sudha Bhardwaj to Umar Khalid to Riya Chakravarti to women protesting at Shaheen Bagh to farmers at the protests, the kind of vilification that goes on, the kind of language used for minorities, and forget a retraction. There's not even remorse. And in fact, in that ecosystem, you're promoted to be as vile. The viler you are, the more primetime slots you'll get. Your success is directly proportional to how you can sort of, twist and turn news. So to me, this equation doesn't really hold, even though what the Wire debacle, the Wire debacle is a huge setback for all of us who have
But
kind of position
can I ask you
ourselves.
something? Can I ask you something? I was among those who, once it was clear that there was, and this is what The Economist actually said about The Wire just before I asked my question, that it has shown stupidity in choosing, stupidity is The Economist's word, not mine, choosing partisanship over process, and it goes on to talk about this being a platform that shattered, quote unquote, its own credibility. Now, my question to you, Manisha, was going to be that what I found really problematic in this, you interviewed me recently. 11 years, 10 years, 12 years after the so-called Neera Radia tapes, you still asked me about it, right? And I actually said to you, oh, come on, Manisha, I can't believe you're still asking me about this. I've spoken about this some 500,000 times. In 1 week of raising 2 questions about The Wire, the number of people from the left who came out and said to me, can we go back to the normal box, please? Who came out and said to me, why are you still talking about The Wire? Why are you still asking questions about The Wire? It's been 12 years since colleagues in the media, who many of whom don't like my guts, have been asking me the same question. 1 week of my asking 2 questions, and people are like, why aren't you showing solidarity? What is the solidarity at the moment that you expected to show?
I don't think that you should stop asking questions of The Wire, or that we've talked about it, now we should move on. This story is going to be discussed for a long time. And I think it's very important for all of us in the news space to take note of it, to debate it, to discuss it, because there's much to learn for all of us in this. I mean, I'm also, I read articles that Samad Bansal wrote, really, articulate stuff. I've been reading what Pranesh has been writing on Twitter, and these are things that even me, as a practicing, news professional, I'm reading it, looking and thinking, okay, my God, these are things that we all need to be careful of. So I am not of the view that stop asking questions of The Wire, or why should we ask them questions, or let's move on to the next story. I don't agree with that. I think this is a very legitimate media story that needs to be debated, discussed, and it will be. Even friends of Wire, you just moving on doesn't mean that people are going to move on. This is a story that's going to be around and people are going to discuss it. So you can't shrug it.
Okay, Sandip, those were questions for what in shorthand is called liberal media. I've never understood these labels because I personally defy them consciously and with glee quite often, and I like to surprise my readers and audience. But you are someone who will be seen as a right-wing voice, right? For the right, this is a moment of glee. For the right, this is a moment of "I told you so. We always told you, Wire the liar," etc., etc., etc. So if the left, loosely put, is protecting its own, the right is simply also taking down the Wire on the basis of your own partisanship. So actually, all that we are left with is partisanship versus partisanship, which I think is the real tragedy of our times. How do you see this, Sandip?
Barkha, I will, with some reluctance, accept your labeling of me as a right-wing voice, though I like to think maybe I'm right of center, but not
Okay.
right-wing in the absolute sense, but that's immaterial. But all these labels are actually problematic, Barkha. Somebody, replied to a tweet of mine that on what basis do you call Wire independent? Who has given them this independent tag? What do you mean by independent? How somebody else is not independent and they are independent? So these are all self-attributed tags which these people have got. Now, the fact is, again, right-wing, some people may have dissed them from time to time. But right-wing kind of gave up on Wire with saying that, okay, let them go on saying what they were. And it was not that they were trying to target Wire all the time. And in fact, Wire is the ones who said that, they were being victimized and all these, the same meta kind of stuff which is coming. So many issues were raised. Now, when you're talking about why should you forget in 2 days, it's a fair question because what Wire has written, the digital footprint of that is not going to disappear in a hurry. You are talking about tech fog. The other person who was named as the most trolled woman journalist, I know very respected journalists have written op-eds in paper about her. This is how she has been trolled and basis that tech fog story. And the biggest problem is what you were saying.
Your reference here is to Rana Ayub.
Yeah, and others also, some of the people mentioned there, people try to take on that and, refer to that. But most importantly, what we're talking about, Pranesh, look at the tech fog thing, because tech fog was not contested by any large corporation. Wire just not only brazened it out, they were arrogant to the point, just like Pranesh was saying, even in this time, whichever, whether it's a technical expert like Pranesh or a veteran journalist like Kanchan Gupta, who raised the issue, Siddharth Varadarajan said, "You'll have omelette on your face." So there was very, very arrogant, not only hostile reactions. It is only, I believe, because Meta took them on that they had to backtrack. If it was just the Indian, what you call the right-wing ecosystem, or even the tech specialists like Pranesh, if they said, I don't think Wire would have retracted.
I think that's a correct point. I think that the Wire, though being hailed for how it's by some, not all, hailed by some, like Kalpana, and we'll come to her in a moment, for how they've handled this. For many other people, they cynically believe that Wire was forced into a reluctant apology. And since then, in fact, after Amit Malviya's declaration, Sadanand, that he's going to sue them, the second response actually takes the position of being the wronged party. So I just want to take a look at the Wire response after the BJP announced. Can we take the banner off? They're saying, we don't know at whose behest the person who deceived us was acting. They are claiming in that sense that they are perhaps a victim, because this is the operative comment. The malintent to discredit the Wire is obvious. Now, I have a problem here, Sadanand, because I think that even in the apology or the response, basically there is a suggestion that there was a larger conspiracy to nail the Wire. There's very little acknowledgement that, at least I think for 10 to 12 days, there was not just a doubling down, but a tripling down on the fact that the Wire is correct, and that anyone questioning it is somehow a traitor to the larger cause. I was going to ask that to Sadanand. Sandeep, did you have a 10-seconder there?
Yeah, just 10 seconds before that. Yeah. All of you are talking about the editorial lapse or the lack of editorial rigor. I would say it starts much before that. This guy, Devesh, Kumar, who was there, his credentials were suspect. You would take somebody in your team who he's the same guy who was involved, if I'm not mistaken, with the tech fog thing, and now you have found that he was a very dodgy character.
But my problem is somewhat different. As people who run platforms, Can we disassociate ourselves from responsibilities of our choices? The first report, Sadanand, let me bring in Sadanand now, didn't even have Devesh Kumar's byline. Let him respond. Let him respond. I'll come back to you. Sadanand, go ahead. Sadanand, yeah.
What's your question?
My question is that the second response to the BJP's legal suit, actually the Wire places itself as the possibly wronged party. It alludes to a conspiracy to discredit it. It speaks about a malintent to discredit it. So instead of saying mea culpa, there is a limited mea culpa, but actually it's saying, hey, there are people out to get us, and we're going to get to the bottom of who's out to get us. It isn't about, oh my God, we messed up big time. The emphasis is different.
No, here I agree with Pranesh. I mean, the apology so far has been pinched. It's been reluctant, and very quickly we see a sort of pivoting towards some kind of victimhood status. Look, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. We all know that the business of journalism sometimes involves making errors. But if I had done something like this, and if I had made such a sort of colossal mistake, all I would be doing all day and night is apologizing without reservation. I'd be saying, sorry, sorry, sorry. I screwed up. I should do better. And I unreservedly apologize to everybody whose image or I inadvertently tarred. I would be apologizing to Amit Malviya. I would be apologizing to Meta. And I would just be apologizing to everybody who I sort of turned on when they are asked legitimate questions, right? And instead, what we see is a very reluctant apology, and then this weird sort of pivot as though, to take the moral high ground. This is a massive L for Indian journalism. But I also want to address, quickly something that, Manisha brought up earlier, which I think is the heart of the issue, which is that, you're going to have ideological actors in a large country with a varied group of people. And the difference, I think, between the sort of ideological actors who you would say sort of on the left and the sort of their counterparts on the Hindu right, I think broadly speaking has been that there has been a sense that the ones on the left will at least aspire to something approaching professional journalism standards, right? They won't do what some of these other guys do, which is, for example, they'll show a photo of some Jain monk who was hit by a car, and then they'll say Muslims beat him up, right? So they're sort of that ecosystem has a lot of what is just pure lies and propaganda. And the belief was, at least my belief was, that on the other side of the spectrum, you may have people who have an ideological agenda. That is okay, as long as they place their responsibility towards the truth, their responsibility to basic journalistic processes above any ideological bias they may have. What this whole fiasco does, and I don't think this is something we should be celebrating, I think it's a tragedy for Indian journalism. What this fiasco does is it raises very serious questions about how much of a difference there is between the two sides on the extremes. If they could sort of let something so palpably absurd get through in the first place. I mean, just look at the original claim, Barkha. Yeah. Amit Malviya, of all people, has been given this miraculous power by one of the world's largest corporations to, within seconds, remove any post. I mean, how does this pass the smell test to begin with, right? So I think this is sort of, to bring it back to what this says about the media. I think that this is a much bigger problem than just a few stories that are
and you've spoken about a pinched apology, Sadanand. What troubles you the most about the kind of reactions you've seen from the Wire, and also, by the way, an impulse in those who are ideological allies of the Wire to actually eulogize them in this moment?
See, I think there's a larger problem here, and the problem is that there many of us in India, we view the idea of apology as something kind of as synonymous with submission, whereas I actually think that people that a full-throated apology comes from a position of strength, not of weakness. You should be able to say, "Look, I really screwed up, and I'm sorry to all the people who are affected." Instead of kind of doing this in this sort of idea that, well, yes, I apologize, but I apologize only to my readers. Why am I apologizing? Because I'm so great. I have such amazing standards, and I let down my standards, and therefore I'm sorry. What kind of apology is that? You screwed up. This is one of the biggest screw-ups in the history of Indian journalism. Own it.
Yeah. Kalpana, I think this must take me to you because you actually said Wire did well in the way it handled the aftermath of the meta blunder. And I think here the general consensus among the rest of us is that it didn't go far enough. And instead, certainly by the time its second statement comes, it is playing the wronged party. Question one. Question two, in any newsroom, the buck stops with the editor. I always say to my very young team that I will give you help privately, but if there is a mess up, and I have actually put my byline or my endorsement on that story, it's my mess up. It is my mess up. You do not hang a reporter out to dry when you have spent 10 days defending his story. I have problems here with the way that's happened. In the hierarchy of newsrooms, that reporter doesn't have the authority to put that story out. So why do you think Wire did well?
First of all, Barkha, in that, the short tweet that I put out after their second apology, I did not say they did well. All I said was that they have apologized. They have said they're putting systems in place and they have tried to be transparent. And this is something that the Indian media can learn from. That is what I said. And I've been an editor and a journalist for long enough to know that from that very first story, there was a problem. Because if I was an editor who did not understand tech, and frankly, I do not, I am from the print media, I would have asked somebody like Pranesh or somebody else. I mean, I have tech friends. I would have run the story past them to check whether it stood up. I would never have run that story without that kind of test if I did not know enough about tech. That's point one. Secondly, of course, there are rogue reporters. And of course, even big publications have done this. They've had reporters, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter from the New York Times had made up a story. This happens. So even as editors, even editors make mistakes. But I have not seen the number of mistakes that print mainstream media has made. I have not seen any of them really admit that they have made a mistake. Often the person who has erred is pushed out, and that's the end of the story. But publicly, they have not admitted a mistake. So in that sense, I think what the Wire did, however insufficient it might be, is an important thing to look at for us in the media. And the other thing I'll say is, I just want to say is, I think also it established that the digital platforms should have the same standards of journalism that we've had in our old legacy media.
Sure.
Our process was longer, so we could not publish something immediately. Here it can be done very fast. But the same thing, when in doubt, leave out. Check, double check, verify. If you as an editor have not understood it, ask somebody else who does understand to give you that view. Ask 2 or 3 people so that you ensure that there's no partisanship. I think those things have to be followed. But the trouble is that I'll come back to what Sandip said about independent media. I think the model for digital platforms is you have to draw attention to yourself, a bit like television channels. You have to do something that makes people look at your platform, right? That you get the funding, that readers. And I think that rush to go into print with an exclusive, I think is a trap. And I am hoping that this will be a warning for other platforms which are doing a very good service, because mainstream media is failing so spectacularly on a number of issues that ought to be investigated, that this will be a learning for them.
I want to pick up this idea of the rogue reporter. It does happen. Sadanand briefly, then Sandip, and then I'll come back to Manisha and Pranesh briefly, please, so we can get more of you in. I'll share a story. We had a young probationer. We didn't confirm him eventually because he didn't conform to the quality of work we expected. But while he was with us, he actually plagiarized somebody's story. He plagiarized it. It was an innocuous feature story. It was not claiming to set any new standards. It was so innocuous that it failed our editorial standards because we couldn't even imagine that this could be a plagiarism. And the person he plagiarized from wrote to us and said, this is what's happened. We immediately wrote an apology. We offered to publicly publish that apology. The person did not want us to go public, so the matter was buried there. Now that I can understand, Sadanand, is an isolated case. Here, the way it played out was different. Here, the editors were part of the byline. They led the arguments online. they led in a way the kind of hostile shutting down of critics. So can this be seen as an illustration of a reporter gone rogue?
Well, I mean, it is still a reporter gone rogue to the extent that what seems to have happened, the best that we can tell, is they had hired a deeply compromised and deeply dishonest individual. And then they believed him. So they believed him when he came up with this fantastical tech fog app. They believed him when he came up with this meta thing. They believed him when he started faking the verification of the emails. They believed him when he started attacking other people and credible experts like Pranesh. I mean, he had launched a whole attack on Pranesh on Twitter when Pranesh sort of, doubted the authenticity of those emails. They basically rejected common sense, right? Who writes, which American writes like that, like Andy Stone supposedly wrote in that email, right? I mean, they basically looked past all the evidence staring in their face that this thing was fake. But at the heart of it, they did something that editors sometimes do, which is not a bad thing, which is you trust the reporter. In this case, they happen to have trusted a person who is dishonest, who appears to be dishonest. And that is the problem. So
But does the buck stop with the reporter? Does the buck stop with the reporter?
With the editor, no question about that. You're right on that. I'm just saying that if I were to sort of unpack what I think the process was, I think that is basically what happened. They got taken in by someone because that person's claims happened to confirm all their pre-existing biases.
Let me bring in Pranesh briefly, and then, sorry, Sandip, I'll come to you because I saw Pranesh's hand go up. Pranesh, go ahead.
Couple of points. I agree with Kalpana, Sharma, in that in Indian media, it's highly unusual to see a public apology of this kind, or even a retraction of a story. That almost never happens. Retractions, to the extent that they have happened, have been non-public. There have been silent retractions and so on. And sometimes those retractions are because of political pressure as well. And this kind of a public apology, I think, is a good step. It is something we've seen from media elsewhere. For instance, Juan Thompson, a journalist with The Intercept, for many years had made up sources, made up quotations, and so on. Even faked email addresses, created fake email addresses to pretend to be sources when his editors started asking questions. But the important difference between this case and that is that when the editors were alerted, they didn't immediately defend the journalist. They decided to make sure of all their facts, make sure that that there wasn't one single point of failure in their stories and their sourcing and their and the claims that they were making. And they decided to actually verify everything. And then they actually realized that that their reporter had been lying to them. And then they publicly issued an apology, retracted all their past stories.
But that's what I'm saying, that the problem to me personally is not the problem, the original mistake, but the response to the problem has been worse than the problem.
Yeah, I'll just want to note that a second point, and then I'll address this. Second point is it's not just a tech issue. Okay, it's a basic journalistic failing. Various questions that I publicly asked that people like other journalists like Samarth had asked of the Instagram account whose content had been removed. Those questions, which were to try and establish the veracity of the Amit Malviya powers, okay, and the logs that they had ostensibly been provided by their source, were not asked by the Wire journalist. That isn't about a tech failing. Okay, this story highlights basic journalistic mess ups. Okay, I asked. So I was provided the emails from the two experts. Okay, and I reached out to both of the experts as it is, but one of them responded to me, Kunal, and I used not the contact details that the Wire editor provided me, because I suspected that he had been in turn provided false contact details, But I established independent contact with this expert, and I asked him, did you actually send this email to The Wire? And he denied it. Okay, that was what a journalist should have been doing. Okay, that didn't require
I agree. I agree.
a technical expert, etc., to do. Okay, that is something that the editors should have done. On the other hand, they shared these details with an air of confidence, saying that no, these people have.
Can I pick up on this last point, because it's really important, because right now the way it's been presented is this is a kind of tech gobbledygook. It was maybe inaccessible to editors who were not tech experts, and it's a really important point that, Pranesh, you're pointing out, that this is basic journalistic failure. And it turns out that cross-check, I mean, we have to also enlighten our audience on how wrong this story was. Cross-check is not even for the purpose of taking down posts. So it isn't just that Amit Malviya was accused wrongly. It is that this program it isn't for that purpose. It may have a million other questions that Meta needs to answer. But Sandip, sorry, you wanted to come in, and then Manisha. Briefly, please, everybody. Sandip?
Couple of things. Kalpana said that, there is always people in a rush to publish. Here, there was no rush. You have done supposedly an investigation. It's not that you are breaking news. Okay, yeah. That is one part of it. What was you drew comparisons with other TV channels. I'm no defender of those people. I do not hold any brief for them. But the difference, I'd say, one is about opinion. They may cast an opinion about people or something, and here you're trying to say that this is rigorous investigation which we have done, research we have done, and thereby providing so-called facts for people to draw the judgment. There is a distinction there. But Wire's response, as you are saying, has been totally unprofessional. Can you imagine somebody saying that our story is right because our reporter had a personal relationship with somebody in that other organization? Do you even say that? That whether a junior reporter had a personal relationship or a professional relationship, that was the kind of defense which was pulled out. And I think that is what belies their whole, not only the credibility, I think it is also the question of their intent. Comes through very, very clearly.
I think two important points have come from Pranesh and Sadanand. Also, of course, from Sadanand. I beg your pardon, from Sandip. Also, previously from Sadanand and Kalpana. And I want to bring in Manisha. There are 3-4 things we're talking about. Was this tech gobbledygook so elaborate, that it was difficult for editors who don't have expertise to actually vet it by normal journalistic standards? Clearly, no. Secondly, what was the hurry? Thirdly, where's the ownership? As Sadanand said, it's one of the biggest screw-ups in recent media history. Where is the ownership? There were so many iterations, so many qualifications before we got to this apology. And this apology doesn't actually apologize to the two people they wrote about, the organization and the individual. Manisha?
No, and I think, I don't think it's a problem of tech, because there are some basic things that could have been done. One is, when you get a document, in this case a screenshot, the first thing you do is you corroborate. And to corroborate, like Pranesh said, you should have actually looked at what the cringe activist guy was saying, whose post was pulled down, the timings that he had put out of the post being pulled down versus what the screenshot said. And, there are these basic questions that could have been asked, which doesn't require you to be a tech expert. And precisely because it's such a big story, you're going after the largest political party, you're going after one of the biggest corporations in the world. You cannot just screenshot your way through it and say, hey, I have a screenshot and that's it. And one thing which is key, I think, is when you are accusing Amit Malviya and Meta of, really going rogue and these extraordinary powers, you should have given them at least a very
right of response.
Right of response, specifically asking Meta, and which didn't happen in this case so far as I know, that we have this document, can you corroborate this, can you deny this, does such a program exist, was such a post pulled down at the behest of Amit Malviya? You have to give them the space to respond, you have to explain to them what you're working on. And of course, Amit Malviya also deserved, I don't know if they sent a questionnaire to it, but I don't think the report at least mentioned that we reached out to Amit Malviya.
I don't know, because the report would have then said we reached out to him, he refused, declined to comment.
Yeah.
That's normal journalistic process. But
But
Manisha,
these
I
are
have to.
basic journalistic practices. Has got nothing to do with tech. And one quick thing I want to add: I don't think this apology can be the end of this issue. If the Wire wants to come out of this while retaining trust of its readers and supporters, you have to put out a detailed piece on what went wrong, the multiple editorial layers this piece went through, the editors responsible for it, the pairs of eyes that looked at it. It's not just a question of one rogue reporter; it's a system in question, and you really have to put out those details instead of putting cryptic, statements like there is a malintent or we are being deceived. Tell us clearly what happened. Come clean, apologize if there's a mistake,
And I have to push you here that do you believe that there's a kind of closing of ranks that is happening because the media environment is so politicized today, and there's no getting away from it, that there are people, just like Wire wanted to believe, because it doesn't like Meta and it doesn't like the BJP, that this felt true, so it must be true. Wire's supporters today, many of them, not all, want to believe that now bus ho gaya, now let's move on, because we are at. You see it online. I have had tweets from people saying, why are you so obsessed with the Wire? And I say, it's been 1 week of like maybe 2 tweets. And now it has become, why are you so obsessed with the Wire? Whereas the rest of us have had questions of our. I mean, I have been questioned more on why I share a photograph of where I do a program from on a COVID yatra than Wire has been questioned for this forgery. Let me put it bluntly. I have answered more questions on my photographs, which harm nobody.
Well, I think over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they have been questioned, and precisely which is why they had to retract and pull down the stories. If it was on for pressure, it won't have happened. And I think that to me, this is a huge lesson for all of us, even for Newslaundry, for smaller organizations, because like you said, this whole expertise thing, this is a problem all of us are grappling with, right? We don't have deep expertise in the way that Times of India may have or Indian Express may have, but we still want to fill that space of doing good, strong investigative stories that are, that go to die in mainstream news. So we want to do that. How do we ensure our process are correct? How do we make sure that we do this while being fair, while practicing best, practices when you're pursuing a journalistic story? So to me, I think there should be more and more discussion on this across newsrooms, because there's a lot to learn from this debacle for all of us.
Kalpana, you wanted to come in, and then I do have to actually close in a couple of minutes. So Kalpana, go ahead. Kalpana?
I just want to reiterate, I mean, I acknowledge that what the Wire, I mean, they messed up royally. There's no question about it in many ways. But I still emphasize the fact that I think the message I get from the fact that they're saying we're putting processes in place, the question, of course, I have to ask is why that process was not there. Because anybody wanting to do serious journalism has to ensure that these kind of processes are actually in place. And I think that is too bad, but I think others can learn from it, because if they haven't got these kind of processes in place to look at whatever kind of story that comes up, then I think there will be a repetition of these kind of things. And the fact that Wire has started this conversation, and it plays an important role. I mean, let's not forget, in our extremely divided media sphere in this country and the depths to which it has fallen, the fact that there are a few, and I call them independent because they're trying to be independent. They may be lured by this, that, and the other, but whether it's Newslaundry, Scroll, News Minute, etc., they are trying to do this. And if you run these people down to the ground, then you're left with the shouty channels and our mainstream print media, and that will be a tragedy. So I don't think it's a matter of being sentimental and supporting the Wire.
But it is a matter of giving them, or being kinder to them than you, because you want them to be there, right? It is that. And sorry, I was going to Sadanand, but Manisha, you had a 10-seconder.
No, I said precisely because you want independent media to survive, which is why we should have very robust discussions on this issue.
Okay.
Should be debated and discussed, so that
I just want to underline again and again what Pranesh said, Sadanand, that this is not about obscure tech reporting. This is not about the fact that I'm not a geek, so I don't get it. This is just a basic journalistic practice, first failing, and then instead of pulling back and saying, okay, so many questions have been raised, let's take it back to the drawing board, just going on and on and on and on in a hostile, aggressive, almost arrogant way, defending that story. Now to Kalpana's point, we've got to sort of the bigger picture is we've got to support the existence of these platforms, because guess what? Otherwise, here's what you'll be left with. Sadanand.
No, I think Kalpana actually, does have a point, right? I think that basically, why are many people sort of drawn to defend the wire? And I think that because they have shown a quality that has been distinctly lacking in much of the media, which is courage. We do live in a media environment in India where the TV channels are cartoon channels, right? That's just like Manisha gets such a big fat target every week. They're cartoons. But like, even if we sort of step aside from some of these channels, the fact is that many of the sort of mainstream newspapers and so on think twice about publishing things that are severely critical of the government. I don't think this is a new development. We've always had this problem to various degrees, but I think with the very powerful government in place, these problems are exacerbated. So I think what smaller online publications like The Wire symbolize for many people, and rightly so, is courage. They are willing to say things that would get them into a lot of trouble, and they have taken a lot of heat. So I admire that too. But where I depart from this idea of blanket forgiveness or different standards is that because so much is riding on your shoulders, it's even more important for you to uphold basic professional standards. So you can't say I'm courageous and therefore I'm going to make stuff up. You've got to be courageous and professional. And then when you do screw up, as they did royally over here, then you must have the courage and the character to accept that with humility.
Yeah. Sandip, let me bring you in, and then we need to start closing. Here's the question. Why did Amit Malviya, it just struck me, why did he not sue earlier? This has nothing to do with anything, but it intrigues me that after the pull down of the content is when he makes this point. And do you believe it's because the apology actually failed to mention it? Maybe it would have been different had The Wire more unequivocally said, "We are sorry, Amit Malviya. We are sorry, Meta."
See, I think it was a very smart move on their part. They let the whole thing unravel. I've seen some, communication where people said, "Wait, we have more. We are not reacting. There is more to come, and we are waiting for the whole thing to unravel." And so they did wait till the end, and not because whether they apologized to him or not. I think in any case they would have gone. They were waiting for that moment to do it. Second thing I want to quickly mention, Barkha, is about this apology bit which you're talking. I don't know whether you noticed, even before the Wire's apology was put out or immediately after that, there were several people writing in support, praising them for the apology. It almost seemed like an orchestrated, endorsement from various people. Oh, they've set huge, great standards, and they've done such a wonderful thing, respectable thing to apologize. So it seemed it was fairly orchestrated over there. Last bit is what Kalpana was saying. You were saying, it's back to the basics, as you were saying. Kalpana is from print. Print, you employ investigative journalists who are criminal listing, but you do your due diligence about that guy, because he could be fabricating stories which you publish, and tomorrow you're in trouble. Even page 3 reporters, people screen them because they could be fabricating some gossip about some film star or somebody. You have a problem. So it is and tech being different. So I think the intent clearly comes through, and people, as you said, why do people jump into it immediately? And the earlier stories of this is because they would like to believe that. And whereas playing up to that sentiment, these people are willing to believe. I'm providing them that material.
I believe, as I give Pranesh the last word, that actually the bottom line is that this is a story about partisanship. It is a story about what I call the media, either most of our media being chamcha ya morcha, supplicants to power, or activists out to have fanciful aims of regime change. Let's not be diplomatic about it. That is what so much of our media has become. And therefore I give Pranesh the last word. There is a sense on one side where there is a kind of hate mongering. Even in the middle of the pandemic, you have hashtags like Corona Jihad on some of our channels. On the other side, you have this sort of sense of we are better than everybody else. And I think that is where The Wire, which has often turned its lens on other people in the media, doesn't look like it's up to that lens being turned on it. I think that is my biggest disagreement with the kind of response we've seen from The Wire. I want you to summarize for us, one, what was the biggest journalistic failure? And two, do we know enough about how fake this other story of tech fog may well be?
Taking the second question first, on the 11th of October, when I first started writing about this on Twitter, then itself I alluded to the tech fog story, saying that given that that story was so lackluster, it didn't have, it didn't seem like 2-year-long story. It had very little proof. The proof that that they had put forward were questionable. Were questioned in that case again by tech experts, because Kingsley John on Twitter, like Samar Bansal, who's both a journalist and a technology expert and so on, that they'd done really good fisking of the tech fog story. And 9 months later, there still hadn't been good responses to their fisking by The Wire. And so I made that comparison explicitly when this debacle started. And so I don't think we have very good evidence right now of how much of the tech fog story is true and how much of it isn't. On the second part, on the other question of what is the biggest journalistic failure, I would say it's not the messing up. Okay, the mess up is the getting things wrong, whether as a journalist, whether as an editor, being fooled by a reporter, etc. That's not the biggest mess up, in my opinion. The biggest mess up is once questions are raised, not being more willing to examine your own biases and your own prejudices, to actually check and double check and triple check every bit of the story, and relying and not engaging in proper in the proper processes of and proper editorial oversight. I think that's the biggest mess up. Now, I must say that this is, to me, while this might be a big mess up because it's so public and so on, but Indian media is filled with false stories, fabricated sources, fabricated quotations, etc. I'm convinced that during the entire Blue Whale challenge episode some years ago, that journalists for the Hindustan Times actually fabricated quotations, and I asked publicly about it on Twitter of the journalist from whom I never got a response. But things like that, I've seen these kinds of fabrications elsewhere in the media, where they've either not gotten caught, or even after they've gotten caught, they've never actually ever apologized, never retracted a story. Stories about nano GPS chips in 2,000 rupee notes, where people, they're just fine becoming laughing stocks, okay, of everyone else, and moving on, not giving two about it. Okay, so this is, I just want to emphasize that there's a context of how terrible the rest of
I think the only point that some of us have made, you have made as well, is that you're not exempt from that scrutiny, because somehow at other times you have had a more sort of sobriety and gravitas to your interventions. I think that's the main operative point, but we will have to leave it there. The bottom line, I think, is, as The Economist said, skepticism is more important than ever before, and to recognize your prejudice and to put it as much as you can to one side while you're reporting. And the third point that's been made is that this was not breaking news. Most mistakes, at least having been in a main big newsroom and now running a small one, most mistakes happen when you're in a hurry. Why was The Wire in a hurry? Nobody's even tried to explain that to us. And lastly, as Sadanand said, when you mess up, you own it. You don't caveat it so much that, at other times, if somebody else had done it, you would have called it whataboutery. Leaving it there, Kalpana, Sadanand, Manisha, Sandip, and Pranesh, thank you. And to our audience, have a great weekend. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.